The cameras were always too close. In the city of Manaus, deep in the Brazilian Amazon, a crime show host built his fame by arriving at scenes before almost anyone else. His crew seemed to know where to go. His audience believed they were watching justice in real time. But in 2009, investigators asked a question so dark it sounded impossible. What if the show was not just reporting the violence? What if someone behind it was helping create it? Let me tell you the story of Wallace Souza, the television host accused of turning murder into programming. The crime fighter. Before the accusations, Wallace Souza was a local phenomenon. He was a former police officer, a television personality, and eventually a politician. In Manaus, he became the face of Canal Livre, a raw, aggressive, crime-focused TV program that promised to expose criminals and defend ordinary people. The show did not feel like traditional news. It was louder, faster, and more personal. It blended street reporting, studio segments, public complaints, police-style raids, and a tough anti-crime message. To many viewers, Wallace was not just a host, he was a protector. He spoke directly to the fear people felt in a city struggling with violence, youth gangs, drug trafficking, and corruption. His message was simple. Criminals were taking over, and he was one of the few men brave enough to confront them. That image carried him into politics. Wallace became a state deputy in Amazonas, winning votes from people who had seen him on television night after night. The same camera that built his ratings also built his authority. On screen, he stood as the man who knew where crime was happening. Off screen, that became the problem. The camera arrives first. For years, Canal Livre had one strange advantage. Its crews often arrived at violent crime scenes with remarkable speed. Sometimes they appeared before other reporters. Sometimes they seemed to have details almost immediately. To supporters, that proved Wallace had strong sources and real street connections. He had been a police officer. He knew people. He understood the city. But to investigators, the timing began to look suspicious. The question was no longer just how the program got there so quickly. It was whether someone connected to the program knew about certain crimes before they happened. In 2009, the case turned from rumor into scandal. Police began investigating allegations that Wallace Souza and people around him were linked to a criminal group. The claim was explosive. Murders were allegedly being ordered so the television show could film the aftermath, increase ratings, and strengthen Wallace's public image as a fearless crime fighter. It was the kind of accusation that seemed too extreme to believe. A TV host creating the news he then condemned. A politician denouncing violence while allegedly benefiting from it. A public crusader accused of feeding the very fear that made him powerful. Wallace denied it. He said the case was political. He claimed enemies wanted to destroy him because he had exposed corruption and challenged powerful people in Amazonas. And in a region where politics, policing, crime, and media influence often collided, that defense could not simply be dismissed as impossible. But investigators believed they had more than gossip. They pointed to the show's unusual access. They pointed to associates. They pointed to evidence recovered during raids. And then came the witness who changed everything. If you're following the evidence so far, hit like. It helps push documented cases like this to more people. The witness. The central figure in the accusation was a former police officer named Moacir Jorge Pessoa da Costa, known as Moa. When Moa was arrested, he gave investigators a story that turned the entire case into international news. According to the allegations, Moa claimed that killings had been carried out on orders from people connected to Wallace Souza's circle. He said the violence created shocking footage for Canal Livre and allowed Wallace to present himself as the man exposing criminals. Investigators treated his statements as a breakthrough, but they also created a major problem. Because a case built around a cooperating witness always comes with questions. Was Moa telling the truth? Was he trying to reduce his own punishment? Was he describing a real criminal network or placing powerful names into a story because it gave investigators what they wanted? Those questions never went away. Still, the allegations grew. Wallace was accused of serious crimes, including murder, drug trafficking, witness intimidation, illegal weapons, and involvement in a criminal organization. His political immunity became a major issue. Without it, he could face the courts like any other suspect. Eventually, he was removed from the state assembly. The fall was dramatic. A man who had built his career by publicly condemning criminals was now being described by investigators as part of the machinery behind the violence. His son, Raphael, was also pulled into the case, facing related accusations. Some people connected to the wider circle would later be convicted or face separate proceedings. Others would be acquitted. That matters. Because this was never a clean, simple case where every accusation ended in the same result. It was a case full of conflicting testimony, political tension, partial convictions, dropped accusations, and unanswered questions. And at the center of it all was a man who kept insisting he was being framed. The unfinished trial. Wallace Souza's defense was not subtle. He argued that he had enemies. He said his television show and political work had embarrassed powerful figures. He suggested the investigation was being used to silence him. For viewers outside Brazil, that might sound like a desperate defense. But inside the world of Amazonas politics, the idea of corruption, retaliation, and hidden alliances did not sound absurd. Manaus was not a quiet backdrop. It was a city where organized crime, public fear, police power, media influence, and political ambition could overlap in dangerous ways. That is what makes the case so difficult. The accusations against Wallace were serious. The circumstances around the show's access were disturbing. The testimony from Moa was damaging. The raids and investigations gave the case weight, but Wallace Souza himself was never convicted. Before the central question could be tested fully in court, his health collapsed. On July 27, 2010, Wallace died in a hospital in São Paulo. Reports attributed his death to complications from a serious liver condition and a heart attack. He was 51 years old. His death froze the case in a strange place. Not cleared, not convicted, not fully answered. For critics, he remained the man who may have turned violence into television, then turned television into political power. For supporters, he remained a crime fighter, destroyed by rivals before he could prove his innocence. And for the families of the victims, the public spectacle around the case created another painful layer. Their losses became part of a national and international mystery. The question that remains. Years later, the story of Wallace Souza still feels almost unreal. A former officer becomes a crime show host. The host becomes a politician. The politician is accused of ordering murders to boost ratings. Then he dies before a final verdict. It is tempting to turn that into a simple headline, but the truth is more uncomfortable than that. The documented facts show a real investigation, real charges, real associates, and real victims. They also show a central figure who denied the accusations until his death and never received a final judgment in court. That leaves the case suspended between two possibilities. One possibility is that Wallace Souza was exactly what investigators claimed, a man who understood fear so well that he learned how to manufacture it. The other is that he was a powerful, controversial figure in a corrupt environment, targeted by enemies who knew the public would believe the worst. The evidence pushed authorities far enough to destroy his career. But death ended the trial before the public could see the full case tested to a conclusion. If you want more court-based true crime cases like this, subscribe. In the end, Wallace Souza's story is not only about one man. It is about what happens when crime, television, politics, and public fear become impossible to separate. And the darkest question is still the first one investigators had to ask. Were the cameras arriving because the show was good at finding crime, or because someone behind the show already knew where the bodies would be? Watch this case next. It gets even worse.